It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
All right, let's get to the Washington stuff because we're starting to run short on time, and this is to me so fascinating because it's so essential to the ascent of all of these guys. But I'll ask both of you this: what do you think is the most important factor in the ascent of that 2012 team, whether it be schematic, human, whatever it is? And then let's start there, and then we can get into the falling apart and kind of the trickle down effect of that, because that to me is like a pretty fascinating part of the series that goes a little untouched because for the purpose of what you were doing, it was not the most important thing, but I'm sure there's more to say about it. So what is the biggest factor in them being able to figure out how to ascend that 2012 team to the heights that it got to?
I'm sure, Logan, you can expand like so much more on this, but conflict, I think, was the defining factor and the most important one. And conflict in its many, many definitions, not just the bad one that we think about, but also the one that helps create and helps inspire in many ways. The fact that they were fighting with each other in ways subtle and non-subtle to get calls on Kyle's play sheet automatically sets a foundation that is very, very different from most professional or personal friendships that people have in their lives. And I think, but that also creates a very specific environment that is painful and difficult and stressful, but also fosters and creates, I think, evolution. And it kind of, like I say, in series, it has since the dawn of time. And so if you're applying that to a football building, what does it look like? And there was some intentionality from Mike Shanahan to do that. He also was someone who, like Kyle, never really let you know where you were at. You had to show your work, but you might not ever get a reaction to it. And so that continues to, it's a psychological effect almost where you're louder and louder and louder and louder about your ideas and what you believe. And then that clashes with other people, collides with other people. And then, all of a sudden, out of all of that fighting and all of that noise, here comes this other idea, obviously combining it with some truly gifted players at that time is such a concoction that I think is unique and very rare in the NFL's historical arc. And when you're sustaining at that high of a level, I mean, it's like that vibration is so high and so intense, something will shatter, right? And that's kind of, to me, and when I'm looking at it from someone who wasn't there, that's kind of like what it all felt like to me, kind of looking in from on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like probably a good understanding of like the coaching staff and a good representation of what was going on there. But like I guess it's probably the football background, like I appreciate that. I mean, that's how the players are treated every single day, and that's how the coaches, like, pressure builds diamonds, and I like that mentality. I like that focus, and I think when you look at that team, it's very similar, honestly, to like what Kyle's done multiple places he's been. It's like an under talented roster outside of a couple really big names. Like you look at the receivers, like Josh Morgan, Pierre Garçon, before he became like that guy. Like I was a starting tight end on that team. I'm not a good football player. You know what I'm saying? Like guys that really understood schematically what the emphasis was, did what Kyle wanted to do, and then like played really hard, and then were able to intellectually handle kind of some of the innovation they were bringing in from the coaching side. And I think the biggest thing, in my opinion, like this is my opinion, like there's probably, talking to different people get different answers, is I don't think Robert specifically understood how much the scheme was elevating him. You mentioned Kyle or Sean wanting to kind of follow this kind of meteoric rise and ascent. And I remember Robert saying, I want to be a pocket passer. I want to do stuff like Peyton Manning does. I want to do stuff like Tom Brady does. And he just wasn't there yet, and then couple that with the injury. And then there was a change in kind of how we did some stuff from like a fundamental standpoint in terms of blocking some of the quarterback run stuff for him that eliminated explosive runs. And I think it just made that, like you mentioned this in the piece, like explosive plays, they lead to touchdowns. And so when you take away 50% of your explosive plays via runs and obviously play action, because defenses can play you differently because the runs are less effective, I think it was like this cascading effect. And, it's spatial Darwinism, right? I remember being in games and like one of the specific coaching points for Robert was like, don't cut inside on like a Grizz or a bear block. And that's where the big slash is, right? Because the safety's in conflict, the linebacker's going to push wide and try to force it back, and there's a big hole there. But you can't do that. And linebackers got faster, and they figured that out. And they would just sprint to the sideline, and Robert would sprint to the sideline with them, and we get a 3-yard gain. And then you're in 2nd and 7, and we weren't equipped to handle that down in and down out. So I think it was, again, kind of a regression of the offense and what made it great. And I think a lot of that has to do with personalities, like player to coach personalities, and obviously coach to ownership, I think was another factor there as well. So
Yeah, and how those three interplayed, and kind of eventually became two opposing sides, the coaches on one, the quarterback and the owner on the other, and that's a power dynamic that is difficult to navigate, to say the least. There's a quote in there from Robert where he says, "I wish there was someone there to protect me from myself." And I think that is one that is going to upset a lot of Washington fans, not because they agree with him, but because they look at him as the guy who was all in for week 1 and, refused to take himself out of games. And obviously there was all the stuff with Dr. Andrews that you chronicle in the piece as well. I'm curious now, like, removed from it, what your reflections on kind of that injury portion of Robert's story is, and how the other coaches that you talked to for this piece interplay with that. And Logan, also what your recollections were of the LCL injury first, and then the ACL, and ultimately the all-in for week 1 in 2013, and what a disaster that turned out to be.
Yeah, I'll say from my perspective, for me, I knew that not having been there, it was going to be so complicated of a topic, because again, and Logan, you said it, like, it depends on who you ask,
Right.
and it was the whole story of those 2 years, 12 and 13 in Washington. Again, that could be its own series, I think, because it was so complicated. And my ultimate goal in presenting the way that we did, and then also the voices that we did, was the reminder that there is always a duality, right? Because you are listening to someone who experienced what ended up being sort of a life-changing injury, and talk about how he felt about that. But you're also hearing Kyle Shanahan's voice, and you're hearing him sort of allude to the split between the front office and the coaching staff, and the lack of support. He says it very quickly, but he says it, the lack of support, and then the perception of his dad. And he's, at that time, he's reading and seeing everything, and he's a kid, right? And this is like pre-Twitter, right? So this is how he's getting his news. He's reading about it, and he's seeing this, but he's got a personal tie to the situation, obviously, but then he's trying to not have the personal tie and just make it about football, but then he starts hating football. But at the same time, an athlete, a player, is going through something. And also at the same time, an entire team is going through something. And an entire team is watching maybe this thing that they had slip through their fingers. There's such a duality there. And that was what we wanted to present, because it's very clear that it depends on who you ask, and I'm sure you can attest to that.
Yeah, and I don't really know what to say, because I don't want to be putting people out there, putting people under the bus, obviously, because it was a very complicated time. I don't know. It's frustrating. I think, speaking from personal experience, I remember leaving the 2012 season thinking I'm going to be playing in Washington for 10 years. Like, the way this offense is going, the way Robert's playing, like, my life will forever be changed, right? And obviously that's not how it went. And I think a lot of players on that team felt that way. And, I think it was tough hearing Robert talk, because I like Robert, like, we get along all right. He's got his quirks like anybody else. But I think the thing that I felt was like, you need someone to look out for you, no doubt. But also, like, there should be an element of, like, personal responsibility, I thought, too. Like, it's that weird kind of juxtaposition with those two things, where it's like, yes, you need someone to help you out, but also, like, I need to be smart for myself. And he was young, and, like, I don't really fault him, because I felt the pressure that he talked about in that, to play and be out there. But it would have been interesting to get more of a perspective from, Robert's voice is very strong in that section. Just get some voice from other people, and I'm sure that they were not very open about that, because I've talked to people about it, and they know they feel very strongly one way or another about it. So I'm sure that, and those are also very personal opinions about that. And so it's just it was a tough deal for everybody, and it's really tragic for multiple reasons. But Like you said something earlier, like football will chew you up. And that's what happened that year for that team.
Yeah, and like you said, that is so personal, right? And for me, in lieu of respecting how hard it was and is for people to talk about it, and I can see how hard it is even for you right now to talk
Yeah.
about it.
Right.
And so for me, it's like I'm not going to narrate over. I'm going to say that it's so complicated and try to present as much duality as I can. But I'm never going to, as a narrator or a writer of the series, insert things that I'm speaking for other people.
Sure.
Because
Right.
everybody, like, it's so. You say the word tragic, like I felt that.
Mm.
You feel it, and it is a defining ache, I think, in a person's life, to have been on those 2 years of those teams. And that's probably as strong as I'll maybe say it, is like, I know, and I hear, and I heard. I don't know because I didn't live it, but I can hear and feel that it was a defining ache in a lifetime,
Mm.
to be a part of those two teams.
Yeah, and I will say, as someone who talks and interacts with the fan base every single day, fans that were fans back then, they feel that ache as well. And it's different, I think, when you're a participant versus someone rooting from the outside. But the emotional investment in the sport and the team is why we all have jobs, and that should also not be understated. The ache and kind of the tragedy within the realm and scope of football that the fan base felt at that time too, having their hopes and dreams of a decade of success ripped away, even if it wouldn't have come with the same decade of paychecks that you would have gotten, Logan, had that played out the way you thought exiting the building in 2012. The
Yeah.
series is The Playcallers. It's available on the Athletic Football feed. Jourdan, it's so good. Thank you so much for the time, and good luck with the rest of the interviews, and then sleeping like one day before training camp.
I just want to thank you guys too. Like, this was such a great conversation. The perspective is so important, and I'm so glad that you shared what you shared. Like, it's, to me, that's a gift, because yes, you guys invited me on here to talk about this thing that's out in the world, but like, this story never stops. And so for me, I'm already, it just totally alive, like listening to you talk
Yeah.
about your experience. And so that's so valuable. It's so important. It matters. And I just want to thank you guys for that.
You're very welcome, and you are welcome back anytime. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do
He's
it.
very, very smart.